A kind waiter helps a strange woman fall in the bathroom, only to find out she owns a restaurant chain and fall in love with him. It was a cold winter evening, and the warmth inside Joe's diner made the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of low conversation feel almost comforting. Outside, the wind howled past the windows, sending leaves skittering down the empty sidewalks. Inside, people nursed hot coffees and greasy burgers, grateful to be indoors. The door chimed softly as a woman stepped inside. She wore a simple wool coat, a scarf loosely draped around her neck, and her posture was tight, tense, as if holding something back. Her face was pale, beads of sweat already forming at her temple despite the chill. She looked around quickly, eyes darting toward the sign above the restrooms. No one paid her much attention, just another tired woman trying to make it through the day. She pushed the restroom door open, her hand trembling on the handle. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered slightly as she stumbled toward the sink. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman on the verge of collapse. Her lips were beginning to turn blue. She clutched her chest and sank to the floor, gasping, struggling to breathe. Her vision blurred. Her body convulsed as a sharp pain stabbed through her chest and back, a sudden, overwhelming sensation she recognized far too well. Clara Bennett was dying. A rare and deadly heart condition she'd kept hidden from nearly everyone, one that had threatened her life before, had struck again. She was alone, and this time she might not make it. Barely conscious, Clara stretched out a trembling hand toward the door. Her fingers scraped the cold tile as her voice cracked, just above a whisper. "Help, please." The door opened a crack. A woman entered, glanced down and froze. Clara met her eyes. "Please, help me." The woman took a step back, holding her handbag closer. "I'm sorry," she muttered. I think someone else will come," and she turned and hurried out. A moment later, two girls stepped in, their chatter dying instantly at the sight of Clara on the floor. One whispered, "Do you think she's faking it?" "I saw something like this on TikTok," the other replied. "People pretend to pass out, then rob you when you get close." They left without another word. Back in the diner, Daniel stood at the beverage station pouring a refill for table 6. He overheard the girls as they passed. "Someone's lying on the bathroom floor. Probably a scam." Daniel frowned. Something didn't feel right. He handed off the coffee to a colleague and made his way toward the restrooms, ignoring the suspicious glances of others. "Sir, that's the women's," a customer called after him, but Daniel didn't stop. He pushed open the door and froze for half a second when he saw her, a woman lying on the floor, lips bluish, eyes barely open. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, crouching beside her. She blinked slowly, her hand twitching toward him. "Chest hurts." Daniel didn't hesitate. He gently checked her pulse. It was faint, irregular. Her breathing was shallow and her skin cold to the touch. His training from a first aid course years ago kicked in. He laid her flat on the floor, removed his jacket, and covered her with it. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, dialing 911. "Stay with me. Help's on the way." He spoke quickly and clearly to the dispatcher, giving the address, describing her symptoms and her condition. The operator confirmed the ambulance was en route. As he waited, he stayed beside her, counting her breaths, talking to her gently to keep her conscious. "What's your name?" he asked, even though she couldn't answer. Her fingers tightened slightly around his sleeve. "That's good. Stay with me." The sound of sirens grew louder. Daniel heard the doors open and paramedics rush in. He stood, waving them over. "In here," he shouted. They burst through, immediately assessing her condition. "Possible thoracic aortic dissection," one muttered. "We need to stabilize and transport." As they lifted Clara onto the stretcher, Daniel watched, heart pounding. He had no idea who she was. No clue that the woman he'd just saved was one of the wealthiest restaurant owners in the country. To him, she was just a person who needed help when no one else would give it. As the medics wheeled her out, Clara looked at him one last time through heavy-lidded eyes. She opened her mouth, trying to speak. A sound escaped, hoarse and broken. Daniel reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're going to be okay." And then, without hesitation, he followed the ambulance into the night. The hospital room was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of monitors. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor served as the only soundtrack to Clara Bennett's slow return to consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered open, the ceiling spinning slightly before settling. She was alive, but just barely. Clara had lived her entire adult life in motion. Fast decisions, faster meetings, and an empire that demanded all of her. As the CEO of the Hearth, one of the fastest-growing restaurant chains in the country, Clara had been hailed as a visionary, a woman who built a culinary empire not from capital, but from compassion. At least, that was the story. In truth, the weight of her position had never been heavier. Just 6 months earlier, she'd discovered that someone she trusted, her second-in-command, a man she had mentored from the ground up, had been manipulating vendor contracts, siphoning money, and planning a hostile takeover. Worse, he had built alliances within her own board, using charm and quiet promises of modernization to sway support away from her. It wasn't just betrayal, it was heartbreak. She had spent years building a company that was meant to feel like family, and now that family had become a battlefield. After months of legal battles, negotiations, and near collapse, Clara had temporarily stepped down from the day-to-day operations. Publicly, it was framed as a sabbatical. Privately, it was survival. In her time away, Clara chose to go incognito. No makeup, no assistants, no name tags or titles. She visited small diners, roadside cafes, mom-and-pop shops, any place where food was served with a human touch, not brand polish. She wanted to remember what it felt like to be on the other side of the table, to see if kindness still existed in the wild, unfiltered parts of the world. She didn't expect to collapse in a bathroom stall in a low-end diner, and she certainly didn't expect the only person who would help her to be a young waiter with a worn apron, steady hands, and eyes that held no judgment, only concern. Daniel. She didn't know his name yet, but she remembered his face. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't hesitated. In a world that had grown cynical and transactional, he had acted from pure instinct, not for recognition, not for reward, just because someone needed help. That moment, hazy as it was, had stayed with her even now as she lay in the hospital bed. She didn't know how long he'd stayed after the ambulance came. She didn't know if he'd even asked her name, but she knew the feeling he left behind, like someone had opened a door to fresh air in a room that had been sealed too long. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt something unexpected. Hope. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. A nurse stepped in, smiling gently. "You're awake. That's a good sign." Clara nodded slowly. "How long?" "You were unconscious for a few hours after arrival. You had a thoracic aortic aneurysm, likely triggered by stress. You were lucky he found you when he did." "He?" Clara's voice was hoarse. "The waiter. He followed the ambulance, waited until we stabilized you, then left quietly. Didn't give a last name, just wanted to make sure you were okay." Clara swallowed hard. "He didn't even know who I was." The nurse tilted her head. "Maybe that's why he helped." When she was alone again, Clara stared at the ceiling, thinking. In her world, everyone had an angle. Every gesture came with a price. Even kindness had contracts. But this young man had proven her wrong in a single moment, one breath, one heartbeat, one instinctive act of courage. He didn't save Clara Bennett, CEO. He saved a woman on the floor, a stranger, and in doing so he had unknowingly given her the one thing she thought she had lost forever: faith. 3 weeks after her hospital release, Clara stood across the street from the same diner where everything had unraveled. Gone was the wool coat and the exhaustion that had haunted her eyes that night. In its place was a pair of jeans, a worn hoodie, and hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She looked nothing like the CEO who graced magazine covers. That was intentional. Today she came as nobody. She waited until the lunch rush began before slipping inside. The place looked exactly the same. Walls slightly faded, ketchup bottles half full, vinyl booths cracked at the edges, and yet something about it now felt warmer, familiar. Then she saw him. Daniel. He was wiping down a table, sleeves rolled up, his brow furrowed in concentration as he lined up the salt and pepper shakers just so. He hadn't changed, still moving with quiet efficiency, still offering small smiles to regulars who greeted him by name. He didn't recognize her. That was perfect. Clara took a seat in the back booth, close to the window. She waited until he noticed her, and when he did, he approached with the same calm energy he had shown the night he saved her life. "Welcome," he said. "You've got the best seat in the house, window view and away from the kitchen noise." Clara smiled. "Sounds like you've done this before." He grinned. "A few too many times." He handed her a menu. "Let me know when you're ready." She nodded, watching as he disappeared to another table. When he returned to take her order, she chose something simple, grilled cheese and tomato soup. He blinked. "Good choice. That's our one thing that never disappoints." "You say that like you've tried everything on the menu." "Too many late shifts," he replied. "Eventually you stop eating for taste and start eating for survival." That made her laugh. They spoke in short bursts. Nothing deep, nothing personal, but something in his manner, unaffected, sincere, made her want to ask more. When he brought her food, she took a deep breath. "So, what's your story?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's usually my line," she gestured around. "Most people don't stay in jobs like this unless there's a reason." Daniel shrugged, sliding into the booth across from her without asking. "Fair enough. I grew up a few towns over, took care of my mom till she passed, got a scholarship for culinary school but had to drop out when the money ran out. Been working since." Clara tilted her head. "You wanted to be a chef?" "Still do," he said quietly. "But dreams cost money. Rent costs more." She looked at him, seeing the layers beneath the uniform, the quiet intellect, the humor, the honesty. She found herself wanting to know more. "You ever think of trying again?" He shook his head. "Not in the cards right now. I make decent tips. And I like being around people. Feels like I'm still part of the kitchen, even if I'm not behind the stove." There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. That's what struck her most. Here was a man who had saved her life with no fanfare, a man who once dreamed big, lost his chance, and stayed kind anyway. She reached for her coffee, then paused. "Do you drink coffee after work?" Daniel blinked. "Sometimes." "Good," she said, standing. "Then you're coming with me after your shift, my treat." He laughed, a soft, surprised sound. "Just like that?" "Just like that." "Are you always this forward?" "Only with people who deserve it." When his shift ended an hour later, they walked to the small cafe around the corner. They sat near the back, cups in hand, the conversation spilling more easily now. They spoke of books and food, of the kind of music you only listen to when driving alone. They didn't talk about who they were or what they'd lost. For 2 hours they were just two people sharing warmth. And for the first time in a long while, Clara didn't feel like she had to hide or prove anything. The next few weeks passed like a quiet unfolding. Clara became a regular at the diner, not every day, but often enough that Daniel would start her coffee without asking. They laughed more, lingered longer in conversations. He still did not know who she was, and she still did not tell him. Clara hadn't planned for it to last this long. At first, she only wanted to see the man who had saved her life. Then she wanted to thank him. Then, she simply wanted to be around him. One evening, after they closed, Daniel walked her to the corner. They stood beneath the glow of the old street lamp, their breath visible in the crisp night air. "You're different," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "That's either a compliment or a warning." "I mean it in a good way," he smiled. "You listen, really listen. Most people talk just to hear themselves." Clara looked away. "Maybe I've had enough of noise." "Whatever the reason," he said softly, "I'm glad you're here." She opened her mouth to say something, something real, but the moment was broken by a voice from across the street. "Clara?" She turned instantly. A tall man in a tailored coat stood by the curb, staring at her with unmistakable recognition. His voice carried, "Clara Bennett? From the hearth? My God, I almost didn't recognize you." Daniel froze. Clara's face remained calm, but her silence said enough. The man approached. "I used to work for your marketing division, back in the early expansion days. I didn't expect to see you here." Daniel's breath caught. His mind raced. Clara Bennett? The hearth? The name hit him like cold water. He stepped back slowly, his eyes narrowing. Clara Bennett? He repeated, quieter this time. She looked at him then, fully, honestly. Yes? Daniel blinked. You're the CEO? The one in all those profiles? The restaurant empire? I was. His face twisted, not in anger, but confusion, hurt blooming underneath. So, all this time, you knew who I was. You knew I didn't know you, and you just let me, talk about my failed dreams, my rent problems? You just sat there? It wasn't like that, she said softly. Then what was it? He asked, taking another step back. Some kind of social experiment? Were you testing me, seeing if I'd treat you differently if I didn't know? No. You could have told me. I could have, she agreed, but I didn't, because I liked how you saw me. That I saw you as normal. That you saw me at all. Daniel laughed once, short and bitter. This whole time I thought I was getting to know someone who understood me. Turns out I was just a story you hadn't written yet. Clara's voice caught, but she steadied herself. Daniel, when you found me on that bathroom floor, I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't anything but a terrified, broken woman who thought she might die alone. He looked away. You didn't know my name, and you helped me anyway. That's why I came back, because you reminded me of who I was before all the noise. He said nothing. I never meant to deceive you, she continued, but I also didn't want to be the version of myself that people treat like a brand. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she said, quietly, when you saved me, who I was didn't matter, but now that you know, it does, and that's what hurts the most. Daniel exhaled. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. She stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. But I hope someday you'll remember the girl who just wanted coffee and conversation, not the name behind 1,000 menus. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone beneath the street lamp, heart spinning between pride and pain. Daniel did not come to work the next morning, nor the morning after that. By the end of the week, his name had quietly disappeared from the staff schedule. No farewell, no message, just a hollow space where his warmth had been. He had left the diner just as silently as he had once walked into that restroom to save a stranger. Clara returned 2 more times, ordering coffee she barely drank, sitting in the same booth by the window where they had once talked about soup and second chances. But Daniel never walked through the door again. It hurt more than she had expected. Not because he had rejected her identity, she had grown used to that. Not because she felt guilty, though part of her did, but because for the first time in years, she had seen something real in another person, and for a fleeting moment, she had felt seen too. But Daniel's silence was not from pride. It was from fear. After the truth came out, he had returned home that night with a knot in his stomach. He replayed every conversation they had, every shared laugh, every vulnerable word he had said, thinking she was just like him, just another soul navigating life from the edges. But she was Clara Bennett. The Clara Bennett. People like her had PR teams, corporate lawyers, reputations so polished they could shine through any scandal. People like him had nothing, just calloused hands, old dreams, and a habit of working until close. He could not bear the thought that someone might think he had stayed close to her because of who she was, that every kindness, every conversation, had been a veiled attempt to gain something. Even worse, he feared Clara might think that too, so he vanished. No calls, no letters, no goodbyes. Clara did not chase him. She wanted to. Every fiber of her heart screamed to show up at his apartment, to demand he look her in the eye and say whatever he needed to say. But she didn't, because she understood now, trust was not built in grand gestures. It was built in quiet choices, in space, in letting go when it hurt. Instead, she wrote a letter. Not a text, not an email, a real letter. Ink on paper, bold in twice, and left with the kind, elderly hostess at the diner. The letter was addressed to no one, but they both knew who it was for. Dear you. I never told you why I was at the diner that night. I wasn't there to spy or to play pretend. I was tired. Tired of people who spoke to my title instead of my heart. Tired of pretending to be okay when I wasn't. Tired of building a world where everyone smiled at me, but no one knew me. Then I collapsed. And you, of all people, you knelt beside me. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask what I could offer you. You just helped. You saved me. Not just my life, my faith. When I came back, I didn't plan to fall into your world, but your world, it felt so real, so honest. You made me laugh when I didn't remember how. You listened without performing. You spoke without agenda. And when you left, I didn't blame you. I only wish I could tell you this. You were never small, not for 1 second. You didn't need my name to have worth. You had it long before I walked in. So here's the truth. If one day you decide you want to build something, not a company, not a career, but something real, from the heart, I will still be here, holding the blueprint. Because I believe in what we started, and I believe in you. C. Daniel read the letter a week later, sitting on the steps outside his apartment. The city buzzed around him, but his world was quiet. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. It was not a plea. It was not guilt. It was permission to stop running, to stop punishing himself for believing someone could see the value in him before he had a title to prove it. He folded the letter, held it to his chest for a moment, and looked up at the sky. And for the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel what had been buried beneath the doubt. He missed her. Not because she was Clara Bennett, CEO, but because she was Clara, the woman who drank her coffee too hot, who listened with her whole face, who once said he made the best grilled cheese in town. And maybe, just maybe, she still believed in him enough for the both of them. The letter stayed in Daniel's coat pocket for 3 days. He read it once on the front steps of his building, then again at midnight with a half-finished beer beside him, a third time in the silence of the diner where he no longer worked, sitting alone at the booth by the window. Each time the words hit deeper. She had not begged, she had not blamed, she had simply believed, and in doing so, she had peeled away the layer of shame he had wrapped around himself for years. Daniel had spent too much of his life thinking he needed a title to be worth something, that without credentials, wealth, or a last name that opened doors, all he could offer the world was effort, and even that never seemed to be enough. But Clara's letter had said otherwise. She had seen him at his most ordinary, no resume, no plan, and still written him a blueprint for something real. So on a chilly Saturday morning, Daniel got up, pulled on his cleanest shirt, and boarded the bus that would take him across the city. The address wasn't fancy, a converted warehouse in a quiet neighborhood where the streets were lined with murals and hope. The outside of the building bore a hand-painted sign, "The Hearth Kitchen, come hungry, leave whole." He stepped inside. The smell hit first, warm bread, simmering garlic, something roasting in the back. Then came the voices. Laughter, a clatter of pans, and in the center of it all, Clara. She stood behind a metal counter, hair tied up in a loose bun, apron dusted with flour. She was showing a teenage boy how to properly chop an onion without crying. Her eyes sparkled as she encouraged him, nudging his elbow gently. She did not see Daniel at first. He stood there, watching her in her element, less CEO, more shepherd, and suddenly every hesitation he had melted like butter on a hot skillet. Clara finally turned, perhaps sensing his presence the way people do when something important enters the room. Their eyes met. She froze. No one else noticed, the world pause. Daniel walked slowly toward the counter. His hands were steady, his heart not so much. When he reached her, he looked down at the cutting board, picked up the spare knife lying beside it, and held it gently. "I think," he said, eyes warm but calm, "we can start with chicken soup." For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then Clara smiled, soft, real, maybe a little watery around the edges. "That's the best place to start," she whispered. He stepped beside her, rolling up his sleeves. "You still teaching people how to cook even when they pretend they already know?" "Only the stubborn ones," she said. He chuckled, setting the knife against a carrot. "Perfect. I'm an excellent student with terrible habits." She leaned slightly closer. "We'll fix that." They didn't talk about the letter. They didn't rehash what had broken them. There would be time for that later. For now, there were carrots to slice, broth to simmer, and children to feed. As they cooked together, Clara stole a glance at him, focused, careful, his hands steady and his eyes calm. She hadn't realized how much she missed the sound of his voice, the way he always filled the silence with ease, never pressure. The kitchen bustled around them, but in that small square of space where they stood shoulder to shoulder, the world felt simple again. They ladled soup into mismatched bowls, passed bread down the line, and when the last child was seated with a spoon in hand, Clara turned to Daniel. He met her gaze quietly, and this time she didn't need to ask. He was there. He had chosen to stay, not for the fame, not for the name, but for the table they would build together. One dish, one day, one shared life at a time. The sign outside was hand-painted, imperfect, and beautiful. Second spoon. Below it, in smaller letters, "Everyone deserves a second serving and a second chance." Clara and Daniel stood side by side as they watched the final brushstroke dry, the morning sun warming the pavement in front of their small, newly renovated restaurant. It was not part of any chain. It was not backed by investors or marketed with a flashy campaign. It was theirs, born from long talks over late-night coffee and quiet dreams whispered while chopping vegetables. They had spent months planning every detail. The location had once been an abandoned cafe in a forgotten corner of the city. Now it was something else entirely. A place of hope, of home, of healing. Inside, the walls were warm-toned, decorated with art made by the staff. The tables didn't match. The silverware was donated, but there was always a candle lit at each table and someone ready with a smile. Clara handled logistics, connections, and outreach. She knew how to get funding, how to negotiate rent, how to make the numbers work. But more than that, she knew how to make people feel like they mattered, even the ones who had long forgotten how that felt. Daniel was the heart of the kitchen. He ran it with the kind of quiet authority that earned respect without ever raising his voice. He taught every new hire how to make soup from scratch, how to hold a knife safely, how to season with care. He treated his staff like students, not subordinates. Their team was not a conventional one. There was Theo, a teenager who had aged out of foster care and had a habit of humming old jazz tunes while he prepped vegetables. Maria, a single mother of two, who had been denied jobs for years because of a nonviolent conviction. Louis, once a professional baker before a car accident left him with one working hand. Here, no one asked about your past. They only asked how you liked your eggs. Each employee wore an apron with their name stitched on by hand, and below that a second word of their choosing: dreamer, fighter, healer. Daniel simply read, believer. The restaurant opened its doors 5 days a week and served anyone who walked in, pay what you could, and if you could not, you ate anyway. Every shift ended with the staff sharing a meal together at the largest table near the kitchen. It wasn't just a job, it was a family. And somewhere between the morning prep and the after-hours dishwashing, between burnt toast and perfect risotto, love quietly made a home in the spaces between them. It was never grand or dramatic. It showed itself in small ways. Clara would bring Daniel his favorite tea when she saw the tired slump in his shoulders. He would make her lunch and leave a handwritten note on the napkin, quoting some cheesy line from the movies she secretly loved. Sometimes they argued about scheduling, about portions, about whether sweet potatoes belonged in soup, but even then, there was laughter at the end of the fight, a kiss exchanged between stirring and seasoning. One night, after the last customer had left and the kitchen lights were dimmed, Clara leaned against the counter, watching Daniel mop the floor. He was whistling, a habit she had come to love, and his sleeves were rolled up, forearms dusted with flour. "You know," she said, "this wasn't the life I planned." He looked up, smirking. "Me neither," she smiled, "but it's better, somehow." He leaned the mop against the wall and walked over, wrapping his arms around her. "Because we built it ourselves," he said softly, "with what we had." She nodded, her cheek against his chest. "And who we are." In that moment, surrounded by the scent of bread and the hum of a refrigerator, Clara and Daniel weren't CEO and chef. They weren't survivors of betrayal or hardship. They were two people who had chosen each other. And in doing so had created something that fed more than hunger. It fed hope. One spoon at a time. 3 years later, the name Second Spoon meant something far greater than Clara or Daniel had ever imagined. 7 locations now stood across 5 states, each one unique, each one echoing the same mission: to serve meals with dignity and to hire with compassion. They had no franchising deals, no marketing team, no online influencers pushing them into virality, and yet, people came. Not because they were told to, but because the world whispered, "There is a place where you'll be fed, seen, and welcomed, and it's real." Every Second Spoon was run by someone whose life had once been overlooked. Former dishwasher turned general manager, a teenage runaway now designing the seasonal menu, a grandmother who'd once been homeless now leading morning prayer circles before opening hours. The restaurants didn't just feed bellies, they fed futures. And at the heart of it all were Clara and Daniel. They never sat in an office far away. They rotated between the locations, worked the line when short-staffed, took night shifts when someone needed a break. Clara managed the numbers, the fundraising, the vision. Daniel kept the flavors honest, the staff encouraged, the stoves always warm. One quiet evening, after the last dish had been washed and the lights dimmed in the original Second Spoon, a small group gathered in the kitchen. There were no decorations, no music, just a long wooden table dusted with flour, a few candles flickering in glass jars, and a handful of people who had become family. It was Clara and Daniel's wedding. She wore a simple linen dress. He wore a white shirt with rolled sleeves and a black apron, the one with the word "believer" stitched into it. The ceremony was brief. Theo, the first teenager they had hired, officiated, with a printed script and shaking hands. Maria read a poem she had written the night before. Louis, with his one good hand, played a slow melody on a battered old keyboard. When it was time to say vows, Clara looked around at the familiar walls, the same kitchen where she had once collapsed, alone, afraid, unknown. Now filled with light, with laughter, and with the man who had knelt beside her and said, "You'll be okay." She reached for Daniel's hand and said softly, "You saved me twice, once with your hands, and again with your heart. This place, these people, this life, it's the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was asking." Daniel, eyes misty, simply replied, "You gave me a table when I thought I had no seat. I'll debate every table after this with you for the rest of our lives." When they kissed, the kitchen erupted in applause, the clatter of spoons and pans louder than any church bell. Outside, above the door of the restaurant, a new wooden sign had been hung earlier that morning. It read, "This is not a restaurant. This is a thank you." 1 year later, the sun had set on another long day of chopping, stirring, laughing, living. Inside their small apartment above the restaurant, Clara, Daniel, and a little girl named Joy sat around a modest dinner table. Joy, with soft curls and curious eyes, had been placed in their foster care a year ago. Now she was theirs, officially, endlessly, and wholeheartedly. She clutched a wooden spoon as she proudly stirred her bowl of soup, declaring, "I made this." Daniel ruffled her hair, "Best soup I've ever had." Clara passed him a piece of bread, her fingers brushing his. Their eyes met, no words, just the ease of love that had grown over time, stronger than roots. There were no cameras, no headlines, just a meal, a family, and a warmth that didn't need explanation, because some stories don't end with a spotlight. They end with dinner, and begin again the next day. Sometimes, the greatest love stories do not begin with a perfect match, but with a simple act of kindness. Daniel never asked for recognition. Clara never expected to be saved. But together they built more than just a restaurant. They built a refuge, a reminder that the world still holds gentle people, warm meals, and second chances. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that healing can come from the most unexpected places. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more true and tender tales that honor the quiet heroes, the simple moments, and the love that grows from them. Because sometimes all it takes is one spoon and one soul who chooses to stay. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing.